Good morning, everybody. This is Mike Stoller, and I'm here today on a webinar virtual event to talk about working in a family business during COVID and after COVID, which hopefully will be over soon. I'm fortunate to have 4 individual families who are truly, I think the interesting thing is that they're all first generation buildings with people with some of their second generation phasing into it on each one of them. So my guests, they include Jeffrey Levine, who's the chairman of Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Clinton Management. I want to give all of your children the right words, okay? Joining Jeffrey is his daughter, Jessica Sherman, associate vice president of all those companies, and Ben Levine, executive vice president of finance and acquisition at the same companies.
I think Jessica is an executive vice president now too, so you better correct that.
Okay, so it wasn't mine. You're both executive vice presidents. Now going to the other side over there, we have the Petraccas, okay? We have Lester Petracca, who is the grand poobah, the CEO of Triangle Equities. And on the other side, thank God we have his Navy son over there, Evan Petracca, who's the chief operating officer of Triangle Equities. From Westchester and Uruguay, we have Robert Weisz, the founder and chairman of the RPW group, and we have Andrew Weisz, the executive vice president of the RPW. And last but not least, our friends who are, I believe, in Long Island, we have Bert Brodsky and Lee Brodsky. Bert is the chairman of the board of BEB Capital and numerous other companies, and Lee Brodsky, who's the chief operating officer. Speaking of companies right now, I do want to acknowledge that I believe that Bert Brodsky and Lee Brodsky, Bert is a serial entrepreneur. Okay, many of the other people are entrepreneurs, but Bert's been the ultimate serial entrepreneur. And I'd like to mazel tov on your health division right now, who's doing work on the COVID testing, I noticed, which has been very, very active.
Yeah, right now we're actually administering the vaccine, both at the Metropolitan MTA in New York and at the Coliseum in Nassau County. Besides doing Gettysburg College and a whole lot of, but it's been an interesting time, very interesting in the healthcare field.
Okay, so let's go over there. Lee, how is it to work with your father? I mean, I met your father many years ago when he was involved with a company called ITEL. You know, he went from this, billing business, and he really reached out to many other businesses. How many years have you been working with your dad, and how'd you get involved with him?
Yeah, so during my days at Newmark, I was really the head leasing agent for all of our assets. So I was able to kind of be a service provider before I was in business, which really helped kind of shape our relationship because I had to treat him like a client, and that level of respect that I learned is super important in the basis of our relationship today. And then over I guess 7 years ago, I started being partially in the business and partially out. And then 4 years ago, I came over full time. The key is that I think for us, and what made us successful in our partnership, is the fact that I went and did something else first and then came in, which created mutual respect amongst us. Some families do it differently, but for us, I think that was a key component to our success.
I think that's the key on every one of their families. Evan, tell us what you were doing, which I do know what you were doing prior to joining the company.
So I went to did my formative time in employment in the United States Navy. I was a surface warfare officer on 2 different ships and did 3 deployments in support of the global war on terrorism. And when I was getting out of the Navy, getting ready to go to business school, I called up Lester and asked him for some advice, and been fortunate to have him in my corner. I was, I guess, born. And he said, "Why don't you come work here, see what you think?" So I came in, and I haven't left.
Okay, in a similar vein, I think, Jessica, didn't you go to school with Evan?
Yeah, Evan and I actually were in the same cluster at Columbia Business School, so I'm fortunate to have him in my corner, just like he has his dad.
So where'd you work, and where did Ben work before you went into this?
So I spent some time at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey doing infrastructure development and management, and I love the project management component of it. growing up in a house with my dad, who's such a New York centric guy, I loved the contributions I was making to the New York region. And after business school, I wanted to make sure before I came and joined the family business that it was really what I wanted to do. So I actually spent some time in Amazon, but when I was deciding what to do after business school, nothing compares to, all of us are very New York focused families, nothing compares to contributing to the communities in New York in which we live and work, and being able to do so alongside my father and my brother, who Ben had already been there for almost 5 years. My dad had been there for 40, and who were accomplishing so much together and had so much to teach me. I just was inspired by both of them. I wanted to be a part of what they were doing too.
Ben?
If I can add before Ben tells about his background, Jessica put me in a very precarious situation. She was working for Amazon in Seattle. And the bottom line is I had to compete with Jeff Bezos for her contract. I don't think it was very fair. So now I'll let Ben tell you about his background.
Sure. So I think that growing up in and around the business, it kind of flows through your blood. And I think that real estate is traditionally dominated by families in New York. And growing up watching my dad break through in the industry and seeing how much his hard work paid off and how rewarding it was really powerful for our family. And, it truly was a family effort. Well, my dad was working 18 hours a day or more at times. My mom was helping raise us. And I think being around it as a kid, going to the Bronx to look at one of the affordable projects my dad was building and ended up being late to a Knicks game, you just kind of got used to always family dinners. We talked about real estate, and kind of I shaped my education and my career experiences around the business, because I knew that ultimately, the foundation is one of the most important parts of a building or parts of a career in real estate. And I think that Jessica and I both really tried to go out there and to experience as many different things as we could. I served my tour of duty at Credit Suisse, which isn't quite as honorable. And I was there 07, 08, I guess right when the Great Recession started, seeing how real estate recovered through that, and kind of seeing real estate now, even during the pandemic, as to how strong of an asset class that real estate is in stable markets, and it's an incredible way to not only create long-term wealth, but to work together and do amazing projects.
Andrew, you're the last but not least.
Yeah, so similar to Lee, I did a number of years at Newmark, which was really, frankly, quite formative for me. I mainly focused on landlord representation. So it gave me exposure to some of the prominent REITs and family ownerships in the city, and gave me a lens into sort of how they thought, how they were looking at deals, how they were positioning assets. And it was crucial as I joined Robert, at RPW about 4 years ago now. Robert built this from the ground up as an immigrant. He never got the opportunity to see sort of how the more institutional players ran their platforms. And so with the background that I got at Newmark, I was sort of able to bring some of that flavor into the business. And I think it's made a good meld of his 40 years of, blood, sweat, and tears, and my, more corporate institutional background at Newmark. It's worked out, very nicely.
So here's a question for the dads. Did you always want your sons or your daughters to join you in the business? Bert.
I'll tell you, I didn't give thought to it. I was always, in every business I was in, I was the chief honcho. And when Lee went into the real estate business at Newmark and started to get involved, you get on in life and you don't want to spend your whole life working, we all worked 18 hours a day, I'm sure. I really appreciate having him come. And I have to correct one thing. He's not the chief operating officer, he's the CEO. He really is the guy in charge. I'm the advisor at kind of 30,000 feet. For me, it's been terrific because it lets me go to Florida and relax and not have to worry, there's nothing like blood. He's there, and I know he's out for the family best interest. And his siblings feel the same way. So for me, it's been I can't complain at all. I will say this, I definitely have acquiesced a lot more than I ever would have with a different president. I never would let someone else do what he's doing. But on the other hand, he's doing a great job, so I can't complain.
You know, Lester, you come from you worked in a family business, okay? How's the difference of working when you work with Petracca and Sons with your brother and now with the other Petracca?
Ooh, that's a tough question, Mike.
That's
why don't
why
we
I
go
asked it to you.
Well, that was a construction company, and you know, as my mother once said, if I knew my children were working together, I would have raised them differently. You can't all be chiefs, okay? So at some point, you have to go your own way, and I did, and therefore, and because of my experience, I raised my children. I have 5 kids. Evan's the second to oldest. I raised them all to understand they would never work for me. They would always be my child and not my employee. And Evan, when he did his 5 years with the Navy, decided to go to graduate school, said, you know, between graduate school, you know, can I come in and work with you? And I said, sure. And he came in and worked till he started his MBA. And I just went home one day and told his mother, he's too valuable to let go. I'm not giving him to somebody else. He has been sent by God to help me run that business. And similar to what Bert said, Evan is really the main guy. And he's the go-to guy. And I really do advise him. And he runs the show.
Here's the point. Jeff has 3 children. Okay, Lester, you have 5 children. Bert, you have how many?
4.
Okay.
4 children.
And Andrew, Robert has 2. What happens to the other members of the family? How do you work with them? Would they want to work in the business? How do they accept the fact that Lee is the CEO of BEB? Okay. How do you know, Lester, you have kids who are involved with the real estate business, and Robert, you had a daughter involved. How do they accept that the next generation is not them? It's the people sitting over here now.
I'll tell you, one of my sons is not in the business. The other 2 sons and son-in-law are. What's interesting is they all believe Lee is the best qualified to run the family business. We had a family meeting and the question comes up, if Lee doesn't run it, I forgot who mentioned it, maybe Lester did, I forget who mentioned, you can only have one president and one chief. But they all believed Lee was the right person. They thought that he could do the most and accomplish the most to run this business. And they were right. And today, now it's 4 years later, they will tell you that was totally the right decision. And they all work for him. And he's the youngest, which is unusual.
That's pretty much the same story here, by the way. You know, once Evan came into the business, I felt compelled to offer all my children an opportunity to come in. And one of the things that came from it was that Evan was definitely the right one to be at the helm. His brother Chris is getting his master's, and then he'll be coming to work at Triangle. His sister Debbie works for PNC. You know, they don't know what they're doing. Her husband's graduating from business school, and we'll see where she ends up. The other 2 have 0 interest in coming into the business. So, you know, it's very similar. As I said, it was fortunate that the best one to run the business was Evan, and agreed upon by the other siblings.
Jeffrey, I hate to put you into the middle. You have 2 out of 3 of the kids over here.
Not a problem.
Okay.
Not a problem. I'm a firm believer in the adage that a parent can only be as happy as the least happy child. So I'm blessed with 3 children and now 2 grandchildren. My 2 older children, Benjamin and Jessica, are actively involved in the business. They each have carved out a domain in which they are content to work. Benjamin has far more of an affection for the market rate of the business, and his financial background lends very well to that. Jessica has more of an affinity towards our affordable portfolio, which is more of a social do-good type of environment. So they each have carved out an important part of our multifaceted business. I think, you know, we do affordable, we do market rate, and we also do senior housing in a very big way. My daughter, Dara, has a passion. She graduated with a degree in education, and she is a teacher, and she is very happy in pursuing her career in teaching. So while she endures the benefits of the family business, but not as an employee, which I think is very important.
Robert and Andrew. Robert, let's talk. You have an older daughter, right?
That's right. It's just very interesting how we all share such a similar process. And both of my kids, when they graduated college, they went on their own and they work in different companies. And frankly, even though I had the hope that one of them or both of them will work at the business, I insisted that they should work out there somewhere else before coming to the company. They both did, and both of them came back to the business. Andrew, that is the younger of the two, was clear among Alexandra and him that he was going to be the one that was going to run the business. And I agree with that as well. And he has a passion for the business. He loves it. He can't get enough of it. And that obviously translates into a terrific dynamic in the business. We went from just being an office developer in the suburbs. Now we are doing residential. Now we are in New York City. It's moving us to Westchester, and from Westchester to Connecticut and maybe New Jersey. So it has worked extremely well. I think that the icing on the cake is we get along great. And I was cutting back, working 4 days a week. Now he's in the business, so I'm working 5 days a week. And, because not only he's in the business, and I love spending time with him. And so why stopping something that is so much fun to do?
So here, Bert brought up the topic of son-in-laws and daughter-in-laws. Let's talk about the involvement of having a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law in a family business. Bert, since you brought it up, I'd like you to speak about it first.
I'll tell you, I'm going to punt this to Lee. I'll tell you why. He's dealing directly with his brother-in-law.
You don't want your wife to get angry at you, Bert.
Why don't you answer that question?
So I actually, interestingly enough, when I came over, my brother-in-law he was previously in the furniture business, and he was very successful. And he was I think third generation in that business. And he saw the writing on the wall that with e-commerce and some of the things going on, that was just he was going to sell more and more furniture and make less and less money. And so we kind of talked a little bit about it, and his work ethic, I believe is from being a broker, that the salesman is the hardest working person. The hunter, the person that's continuously working, that has no hours, that continuously works and drives to sell, is someone that's really irreplaceable. And so I felt like he could be a real asset to us, and especially because his children obviously have long-term gain here, that it then hits a special spot. And I was right. I mean, when I'm here, he's here, and we both leave at the same time. He is one of the top 3 hardest working people here. He treats it like it's his own family business, because it really is. But he had the skill set. I mean, he really, when you're a salesman and you've hunted for a living, so to speak, you're cut from a different cloth than people that have done other things. And so those attributes have made us a lot more successful. I don't know if that answers the question necessarily of in-laws, but like he had the skill set that really has helped drive the ship.
You don't realize that Mr. Weisz started in a family business and came over to America and was selling furniture. So the similarity on the furniture business to the real estate business.
But I have to say one thing. My son-in-law came to work for me 12 years ago, directly reported to me, and that didn't work out. He went back to the furniture business, but he has worked out great with Lee. That has been terrific.
Jeffrey and Ben and Jeff and Jessica. Jessica, you have a husband who's in the real estate business. Would you like to see him become part of the family business?
I think that he works more on that acquisition side, more in the institutional side. And would I love to work with my husband like I work with my dad and my brother? Absolutely. But I also think that he loves what he does, and it's not really right now on his radar.
Jeff, what's your thoughts?
I think he's a wonderful young man. I know he has a very good career in place at Invesco, actually. I think they value him there, and I let him make his decisions as to his life path.
But it is fun that we can all talk about the industry. It's nice to have we think of things from a very different perspective than he does. So it's always interesting to add that into our dinner conversation.
And one thing I'd like to add about multi-generational family real estate businesses is it's, first of all, it's not just brother-in-laws and sisters-in-laws, it's nieces and nephews and uncles and cousins. And it can create a really unique and special dynamic, which can at times be challenging, but ultimately I think it's really rewarding for everyone.
I think the Levine family has enough members to squad a baseball team.
We have a minion every Friday morning if we need it.
Okay, I mean, with the number of relatives in the business over there, there's no question. Let's talk about pandemic came, COVID came. What effect did it have in the operations of your businesses? And how did you maybe delegate, which Bert, I heard Bert with the word delegate, Lester would delegate. How do you delegate during the pandemic?
Are you
Who's the
directing?
question?
No. Okay, pre-pandemic, you were in the office. There were different situations. Now you were operating, Jeff, you spent a good portion of the time in Arizona, okay? Florida, Lester was in Florida, Bert was back and forth. So how is it to operate a business and make decisions during the pandemic?
I think it actually, I'm happy to pass it to my dad after, but I think that the kind of trust that's required to effectively execute during a pandemic is built in businesses like ours that are family-based businesses that have that kind of a culture. And that because we already had existing strong relationships across the board, it allowed us, with the help of a lot of technology, to seamlessly transition and be extraordinarily effective, despite the fact that people were in different locations, because there was a level of trust, a level of support, and a level of understanding that is so core to all of our companies.
Michael, I think, having done business both in Arizona and New York, having built a hotel in London, we've gotten used to doing business somewhat remotely at times, while we haven't used the tools. We used conference calling in the old days, right? So now we've gone beyond conference calling, whether it's Microsoft Meeting, whether it's Zoom as we're on now, or webinar. The reality is our capability to communicate with our people, as long as you have the right people in place. And in this case, I have my children. I have extremely strong heads of each of the operating companies, and our communication has not been damaged by the virus other than for the lack of personal contact. So I'm very happy, not only with the way we have communicated and executed and worried about our tenants and worried about our staff and kept them safe through COVID protocol in the offices and on the job sites. Much of the work that we were doing throughout the pandemic has been considered essential because we have huge affordable components in our market rate job, and our affordable projects are essentially essential themselves. So we continue to work. We've had great progress through the pandemic. I'm also happy to tell you that after the fear that gripped us in April, May, and June, after the initial pandemic hit, with tenants vacating, with affordable tenants unable to pay rent, the recovery has been somewhat remarkable, part due to the aid that was received by the affordable tenancy in the way of rent payments, whether it's the Project Parachute that we put together with Redney and ISAFA and the Enterprise Foundation and the Enterprise Community Group, or the market rate rental. While we lost younger people who flocked either to vacation homes or family homes or parents' homes or grouped together at cheaper locations outside of the city center, we have seen a resurgence of tenancy where we dropped to below 90% occupancy. We're back in excess of 97, 98% occupancy in many cases in Williamsburg. In Manhattan, we haven't fared quite as well, but we're still back up in the 90s. We've had to reduce the rents marginally in order to induce people to come back. But I think once this work from home passes and people will come back to the office, because somebody sent me a devastating article in the New York Post about the future of New York City. And a friend of mine wrote me, "Why do you continue to live there?" And I said, "Because we have great pizza and bagels."
I think that's why you
I
consider
can't say
everything
more than
Post.
New York City has a magnetic attraction for those of us who are connected to it. And I do believe that ultimately, as in the past, New York City will come back. And I look forward to continue to do business there, although it is quite difficult under the current socio-political economic climate.
You know, Michael, one thing I'd just like to add is when my dad started the company in 1979, he started out of his apartment. 718-224-7147, which is the phone number for Levine Builders, used to ring both in his apartment and in the office because there was no 4 cell phones. And if he wasn't in his office, he was at a payphone. My dad has been committed to keeping a culture of our company since its beginning. And, you know, we talked briefly about the WeWork documentary on Hulu. And, you know, seeing what happened in 01 and then seeing as an employee what happened in 07, 08, 09, basically all the way through 12, we don't need to worry about cutting 7% of our staff, right? We worry about our employees because they've been a part of our family's business. And in a lot of ways, we consider them to be part of our family. And I think that commitment that my father showed to our employees through multiple economic cycles and his compassion and the level of thoughtfulness and caring that he has for everyone who's a part of our corporate family really motivates people, and that commitment that he's demonstrated to them, you know, they demonstrate back in spades, and that's really important.
Right.
Here's the point. Prior to this phone call, I spoke to somebody who's in a business. He's in the catering food service business, and he was talking to me about an opportunity to go, let's say, 150 miles away from his daily business over here and to try a new business. So my question is, today, what do you see as opportunities out there for each one of you? And then the bigger question is, who really, do you have a chief operating officer or an investment committee person? Who's making the decision if you're going to do a new type of deal? For example, Robert brought up the fact that he may think about going into New Jersey. He went into residential, which he hasn't been in. When Andrew joined, they had some more office buildings in Manhattan. Lester has gone into the townhouse development in Long Island. Bert, you go into too many businesses. I can't go over all of them. But the point is today, if Andrew came to Robert, okay, or if Ben and Jessica came to Jeff, and if Evan and part of the other tribe members of the Petraccas went to Lester, how do you make a decision on will you do a deal, or what are you going to go into, and where do you believe the new opportunities are? Lee?
So we're lucky. We have someone that I would consider a professional manager who started it within our organization as associate general counsel and worked his way up all the way to being our COO and president of our lending platform. And he really plays intermediary. So we come up with an idea or a new business venture, potentially, like as an example, our lending platform. The three of us talk about it, and he kind of is the tiebreaker if Bert and I disagree. And he's earned the respect and from us to really challenge us and push both of us to be thoughtful. And I think that's really helped us. And so our investment committee is essentially the three of us. And I've been pretty successful to have someone who's as thoughtful and smart as he is to help kind of mediate with us and talk through the potential of each transaction and different business lines and how we grow in a thoughtful manner.
The Levine family. New opportunity out there. Maybe you can build up a new hotel. Maybe you can open senior housing in the city.
Well, as you know,
who's the decision maker? Part of the Miss Brooker and everybody.
But we have a hierarchy. We have a lot of very capable people, including my children. I think you know that my wife's brother, Stephen Chana, who's also been with the company almost 20 years. He is extremely capable. We have a CEO of a development company, Jed Resnick, who is an extremely strong asset. And we have a support team, which enables us to do analysis of projects. And I always like to say that I am only a mathematician. You know, obviously, personal preference comes into it, but you have to run numbers through an equation. The numbers have to come out in such a way as they please the lenders and the equity partners you need to participate with you. So we run numbers through the blender, and if they work, we're happy to do a job. And we also have discipline. If they don't work, you know, we don't do a job. We don't change the revenue forecast to adjust the yield so that we can get financing. We like to know that what we're going to do will succeed. And that formula has worked very well for us over these last 40 years.
And it's very rare that we disagree, because I think that our investment committee is really YOC, or yield on cost. You know, I think that it adjusts with the market and adjusts based on our equity and debt partners. But ultimately, I think that the yield drives the decision.
Robert?
Well, we have staff that does the analysis in terms of numbers, but to put it in simple terms, the smell test is Andrew and myself. And once we get all the facts and we get the return and we look at if the investment makes sense, at the end of the day is Andrew and I making the decision, and we see things in a very similar way. If I have to say something, will be that Andrew is a little more conservative than I am. So sometimes I may want to take a chance on something and he will just put the brakes on it, and I just and I follow his views. So that works very well. Frankly, it's great to have somebody you can talk to. I never had that before. I was making all the decisions. So the ability of having a fresh mind with a different point of view and just test the analysis together is just a wonderful and very rewarding experience.
I'll just add, I think it helps that Robert and I, we see things fairly similarly. And we're in a unique position that we don't have equity partners. So, him and I are truly the investment committee, but I think on any major transaction, if him and I are not on the same page, we don't necessarily need to agree 100%, but we need to be, rowing in the same direction. We don't do it, quite simply. So, it makes things run fairly smoothly because between the two of us, we can figure things out pretty quickly. Do we do it or do we not?
You bring up a point that I wanted to bring up. Equity partners, okay? Robert, you've never had outside equity. Lester, until a couple of years ago, you never had outside equity. Jeff, you've always had outside equity in a different point, but the world is changing. Lee and Bert, I'm not sure if you ever take outside equity. You go to the equity partner upstairs called Bert Brodsky sometimes, or someone else. How do equity partners react to a family business? That's a big question. Jeff, since you've been involved with insurance companies for many years and other equity partners.
Well, I'll tell you very simply, the people that we have in decision-making capabilities, whether they be family or not, are very strong operators. So
No, that's not my question. My question is, when you go out to an equity partner, like Lester, when you went out to Lupert Adler, or you went to Goldman Sachs, or you've gone to these different people for equity, how do they react to the fact that you're a family business? Or would they like more of an institutionalized thing?
That's in a very positive light. And I think that has to do, like the rest of the families on this call, with the capability that's behind you. For years, I kept saying to the banks, please ask me for my succession plan, because you're going to like it more than what you have now. And I think that is key to the success and the acceptance of a family business is, what's the capability behind you look like? If it doesn't look good, they're not going to be happy. If it looks good, they're going to be very happy. And I think they are, for the most part, very accepting of the fact we're a family business, and that, like most of the people on this call, the decisions are brought forward in various places within our entity to look at a deal. But ultimately, it's me and Evan sitting down and kind of deciding, whether we move forward on this one or pass. So I think in a very positive way, to answer your question, Michael.
Go ahead, sir.
I would just add that to what Lester said about in a positive light, with the family business, they look at a track record of what's standing there, and not every business has 40 years of success and of not only building wealth but successfully building buildings. And or probably the thing that we lean on the most is Lester's experience at Triangle as both a builder and a developer, and that gets a lot of comfort. It's not some upstart 35-year-old developer. It's a guy who's been doing this for 35 years of his life, 40 years of his life.
Bert?
We usually don't take in, occasionally we do friends and family, but what's interesting is when I dealt with the banks, that was their real concern. They said, Bert, what happens if something happens to you? And then when I brought in Lee, it gave the banks comfort. It gives everybody comfort, because they do see the succession plan. And if you bring somebody like Lee in, who's impressive, they're more comfortable than they will just with me because they know that if something happens, there's somebody else behind me. And then Lee, of course, built the whole structure behind them. So it's worked out well for anybody that invests with us, but especially the banks.
And, you know, Michael, I think that there's really been two key components. There's, with regards to guarantees and liquidity, right? That pretty much goes straight to my father. But then on the other side of it, we have key personnel, the heads of each of our businesses, and then, you know, the key project manager for any project. And typically within our loan documents, there are specific people called out as a, you know, it's almost like a development succession plan for that project. And so long as we have the structures in place, if God forbid something happened to my father, or if God forbid something happened to any combination of us, there are specific people who have been tasked with the responsibility to ensure that the project is completed. And then on the liquidity, personal guarantee side, it's just something we have to deal with the lenders.
You know, we all know the history of the real estate families. Some of the real estate families have been able to transition from the first to the second to the third. Not too many have been, but there are also those war stories about other families who just couldn't get along and they broke up. What do you attribute that you're all continuing and growing as opposed to some of the families that we know who have had problems and they've had to break up their operations?
If you want me to answer that, Michael, I will tell you that, again, somebody said earlier in this conversation that I am a father before I am a boss, and they are siblings before they are coworkers. And you should never lose sight of that in this family business environment. You have to value what's important. Now, as you know, I'm first generation, my children are second generation. I don't think we have to worry about third generation for a while because my granddaughter is about to turn 3 and my grandson will be 1 on May 4th.
Plenty of time. Yeah, I think, look, the dynamics of a family business is obviously different than that of a general business. There's emotion, there's relationship, there's, you know, siblings. I once was told by my older brother, as a grown man, like it or not, I'm still your older brother. Well, yeah, but I'm a grown, capable man. So you have to keep it in perspective. I think we do that well. Business is business and family is family, and family comes first. So I think you just have to manage the dynamics in a proper way.
Okay, you know, a number of years ago, Bert, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you have to be flexible. If you have two people who are totally not flexible, then you can have a problem. And it does go back to, you could say it's business, but it often carries over into the family relationship. So you both have to be flexible. If you're flexible, it'll work out. And of course, we're lucky because although we have several people in the family that are related, they all look to one person really, which is Lee, who looks to me. So it's worked out well for us.
Just quickly to add to that, I think you have to be empathetic to each person's risk tolerance. I mean, you know, when you're starting to talk about investing family capital and different things, you have to understand each person's perspective, spend the time, give them the respect. Even if they're not the decision maker, you have to give them that respect. And if you are able through the business to create independent wealth where they can make their own decisions in certain instances, when you have liquidity events, that's game changing. And that really, that allows for them to believe in you and to build the business, but it also allows them to make their own personal decisions. And that empathy and level of respect that you earn through that, I think creates a real synergistic relationship when folks are either in the business or out of the business or not necessarily the decision maker. That's a big deal.
You know, a number of years ago, the topic of discussion was companies becoming REITs. Okay, so you had, for example, the Mack family and the Cali family created a REIT. There were other REITs created. Today, the subject of the day is a SPAC. Okay, a couple of companies in the real estate business have become SPACs. You know, Jeff Levine and his entire family, you know, the baseball team, they could become a SPAC over there. You know, so what's your thoughts about creating a SPAC? And you know, since everybody else is creating a SPAC, you have a business plan that certain people are there. You'd have additional capital. Have you thought about the idea about a SPAC? Jeff?
Well, we started to look into it, as you know, but I think if you read the papers, it's quite apparent that the market is flooded with SPACs at the moment.
I didn't know you had looked into it, so.
We had, I think, you know, my dear friend Harry Braunstein, who is very familiar with the space. Having said that, the fact of the matter is that there is an abundance of SPAC creation at this moment, and there are a limited number of targets, and whether we're in a bubble or not, those targets are quite pricey. So I don't always, for me, it's the right moment to move in that direction.
And to clarify, we weren't looking at stacking our business. We were looking at creating a business to stack a company. So it's not, we weren't looking to take our company public through a SPAC. We were looking at using a SPAC as an opportunity to acquire an operating business potentially.
Robert, have you thought about a SPAC?
Well, we really haven't. We looked at the possibility of doing a REIT a few years ago, and we came to the conclusion that we really enjoy the structure we have, that we have full control. We don't have to report to anyone, and it's just a very comfortable way of doing business for us. And the same thing will apply to a SPAC. I don't think that we want to keep these as a family business. We want to be able to take care of our tenants in a moment's notice without having to ask questions or report to anyone. And I think that that's a decision that it's business to business. In my business, when I started 40 years ago, I could have used some capital, but nobody at the time will give me the time of the day. So when things turn around 20 years later, I was the one that didn't want anybody's capital to come in and have a say in my business. So for the time being, that's the way we are going to run it. And then when Andrew takes full control and he sees other things, then we might open up to other possibilities.
Bert and Lee?
I took 3 companies public. I was public. I didn't love the public market. You worry about quarter to quarter. You can't make decisions that you ordinarily would make if it was just you. And I never liked a lot of partners. And being public, it's a lot of partners. So I don't think Lee and I ever discussed it, quite frankly, because I'm not in favor.
The reality is he's a deal junkie. He brought it up, and I was like, "You want to do everything? We have to focus." And so it was a short conversation, but that's the reality. We're really trying to focus on the lane that we're in, which is growing our lending platform and raising institutional capital on the industrial side. And it just felt like the path we were on was a path of less resistance at the time.
You bring up the subject of raising capital. Who out there is raising outside capital today, especially since you're all family businesses? Lee, you're talking about outside capital. Yep. Lester, Robert, and Jeff. What's your thought about raising capital? Because when you raise capital, you have certain plateaus that you have to reach over a period of time. And you may not be happy.
Sorry, we are not raising capital. We work with our internal capital, and we think that that will give us a good pattern of growth, and we rather maybe grow a little bit slower with our own capital, but have full control and having no reporting and no questions to anybody else, and we like it that way.
Evan and Lester?
Evan,
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Evan.
I was just gonna say, we raise capital on a deal by deal basis right now. I mean, you alluded earlier, Michael, to Lester started the business, grew it with his own equity. We've now grown into, leveraging other people's money to help us grow. But, outside of that, on a project by project basis, we have no intention of raising capital.
Lester?
We're currently raising capital in New Jersey because it enables us to do larger projects. So our typical project size has grown, and with that, the desire to take in outside capital is there.
So here's the question. Okay, the vaccines are here. Things are getting a little better. People are going to go back to work. Most people believe it's going to be probably 4 days in the office, maybe 3 or 4 days, but I don't think it's going to be a 5-day. Where do you see the opportunities today? So if Lee, I'm talking about Lee and Andrew on this, because you both came from the office market. Do you believe there are opportunities in the office market today for the future?
I do. I mean, I do. I don't know necessarily on the buy side. It's gonna be interesting because I was reading an article the other day that said it was the blip that never happened. So you're starting to see the office market come back, and I do think that you're going to see it accelerate much faster than it declined. But I think the way people work is going to be different, right? You're going to see probably a 3-day work. The 5-day work week is over, in my opinion. And so the question is how does that affect how people sit? You know, historically, or at least where we were the last decade, is people were sitting closer and closer together. And now you're going to see a situation where they're sitting further and further apart. And so how much space does that occupy? How does that affect absorption? But you are seeing that the market is really efficient, both on the multifamily side and on the office side, right? Rents have declined and velocity has gone up. So it's an efficient marketplace. And I think you're going to see the office market come back. I'm not sure if you have a ton of buy side deals on the office side. Andrew would probably know better than I would, but you are going to see an acceleration here of folks signing leases. You're already seeing it now where leases are getting signed and the velocity is increasing at a dramatic pace.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the buy side, there's been very, very little to look at. We did acquire an office deal from SL Green in Stamford, Connecticut in December of 20. Long term, we're bullish on office. I think now the norm is to be home and work from home. But when your colleagues are in the office 3 days a week or 4 days a week or 5, you're going to want to be there. There's going to be a fear of missing out, a fear of getting promoted, a fear of learning. And I think long term, people are going to be back in the office. And we're seeing, velocity pick up in our Midtown asset. It's been the last, I would say, 90 days. There's been a tremendous amount of activity. Rents are obviously down. Concessions are up as expected. But, it's good. It's a good sign for what's to come. And I think with the vaccine and the warm weather, I live in New York. I've been there the whole time. You're feeling the energy, on the weekends. People are out. We just signed a retail lease on 40th and Madison with, a food operator. So things are starting to happen.
Jeff?
Well, obviously, the market in terms of new economic development for multifamily is subject to a lot of questions right now. Obviously, current rents don't necessarily support these COVID-created rents lower, and the unknown political environment where the progressives are beating up on the real estate industry, the fear of further regulation, the anticipation of the expiration of the 421A and putting further requirements for more affordability and more rent regulation on multifamily makes it very difficult to build in New York City in terms of the market rate component. So we are focusing on the affordable. I can let Jessica talk about that. There are numerous RFPs and such.
Yeah, I think we
Jessica, talk
definitely.
about the affordable.
Yeah, I think we see a lot of opportunity on the affordable side. A nice thing about our company in particular is that for 40 years, we have sort of straddled the market rate and affordable worlds. And in the recent past and looking forward, we really think that, affordable housing in New York has always been a priority of ours. There's a huge need for affordable housing. And between the city and state RFPs, whether they be ground up or preservation, there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of really exciting projects in important neighborhoods that we hope to be a part of.
Lee, you've gone into the lending business over there, okay? I think you're the only one of the group over here is in the lending business. Do you believe there are a lot of opportunities or a lot of competition or both?
I think there's both. I mean, I think that loans under $20 million is where the game is played for us because we don't want to, there's a ton of rate compression above that. But we do want to build a business, you do want to build an efficient business. For us, it was just crucial to be able to play in all market cycles. And I don't think you can, but when the market gets overheated in different asset classes, if that's your core competency and you're just on the equity side, it's tough to feed the 35 people we have sitting here and transact when you think the market is too hot or the values are too high. So it allowed us to play lower in the capital stack and lend on assets that we know well, that if the market does decline and we have to take the asset back, we can operate it, which is our litmus test, our risk litmus test. But it was really just to provide current cash flow in a business that has so much long-term capital gains and has those periods where you're not getting current cash, and balance our portfolio out and allow us to play in all the market cycles.
Let me bring up two topics that people say when I bring them up on my shows, they say, am I crazy? The future of retail and the condominium world. Who would like to address that? You know, Robert, you have certain retail, as you just said, you know, the food service, then I believe you have the city MD who is moving into your property also. How do you see retail today?
Let me answer that question by making a reference to 9/11. I remember soon after 9/11, I read an article saying that New York City was going to change forever, that the 50, 60-story towers will not be places for people to want to have an office, because after the experience of the Twin Towers, New York City was going to be different. And obviously that probably changed within 24 to 36 months. And not only it went back, but it went back much better to higher numbers than prior 9/11. We are at the center of the storm now for many reasons. The pandemic is one of them. Amazon is another one that is affecting retail. And I think that when the dust settles, the office buildings are not going to be much different. The people are going to be most of the time in their offices for a number of reasons. People will not want to be out of the activities and the information and the connections that they will have in the offices. As far as retail is concerned, we are definitely going through a dramatic change, and retail is very different in the downtowns than is in the malls and is in the open malls. But our expectation is, first of all, rent has dropped dramatically. The nature of the retailers also have changed. And that's, in my point of view, is practically the most uncertain part of the market. We don't know what's going to happen with retail. We know that it's going to be a change. We know that it's going to be a difficult process. And we are very fortunate that we have very little retail.
B, you're a lender. What's your thoughts about lending on retail?
I think it doesn't necessarily pass the litmus test of something that we can operate, right? So I have to be able to
wait,
operate.
if I had a Five Below, a Burlington coat, a TJ Maxx, a Home Sense, a Dollar Tree, they're all growing. I think it's a case-by-case instance.
It's definitely a case-by-case instance. I mean, if it was in Port Washington where we live, I'd be all over it. If it's in another market, it's a different story, right? It's a totally case-by-case.
Michael, I have to tell you, I never was in retail. For some reason, I always gravitated to residential and industrial, and I guess the office is the same way. We just, I think the pandemic is definitely affected, but the retail was affected before the pandemic. If you walked up Madison Avenue in 2019 or 20, you saw the vacancies, and they blamed it, of course, on the rents. But we just never have an expertise in that. And yeah, would I buy a strip mall fully rented on long-term leases? Maybe, but we don't operate that right now. So it's a new entry for us.
The reality is much of my retail is at the base of my residential apartment buildings in the 5 boroughs, and that community service retail, whether it be the bank, whether it be the supermarket, whether it be the nail or hair salon, that's fared very well. I mean, obviously for the moment, the personal service stuff of hair salon, gyms and so on has suffered, but that stuff is all strong, and most of my tenants, with some cooperation by me, have been able to maintain their occupancy, even if they weren't over, because we know it's more difficult to replace such a tenant between the tenant fit out, between the brokerage fees and the free rent. So, you know, again, community service retail, I think, has been far less impacted by this retail apocalypse created by e-commerce. And I think that's the type of retail that I will continue to be in.
And I also think that destination retail tenants will still exist. You know, I don't think that the rents in Soho will be what they were before the pandemic for a while, but I think that these companies need to have footprints, whether it's on the Upper East Side, Soho, meatpacking, kind of that destination retail experience the Starbucks Reserve. You still need to have a footprint. You still need to be able to engage with your customers. And when most of us are able to buy more and more things online at places like Amazon, people still like going to the corner store. People like going and trying on their Montclair jacket or going to the Nike store. So I think that you'll still have those things. I just think that there's gonna be more community retail and more. I'm very curious to see the restaurants that are gonna open out of the pandemic. I mean, there's all this pent up demand. And I think that if the vaccine rollout keeps going as well as it's going now, and the variants don't impact kind of the slowing of the curve over the long term, I think that retail could have a very strong comeback.
Michael, we started our development career on retail. There is no question in our minds that retail has changed. I think the pandemic probably accelerated e-commerce by probably as much as 10 years. I mean, people that never would order from the internet or now ordering, my mother, for example. So I think the pandemic has changed retail forever. And I think Amazon has as well. But what we find, and even in the mid and big boxes, is in the right location, retail is still there. Rents are a little bit different, but retail is still there. So, again, if on a case-by-case basis, as you said.
The impact's going to be felt in the C locations and the B locations, not the A locations. Location at the end of the day is the location of real estate. People still want to be there, and we've certainly seen that in our portfolio that we're getting traction and having no problem leasing up spaces as they become.
Okay, I have 1 minute left, and I just want the subject of for sale housing. How do you see that? For sale in New York City, for sale in the suburbs, because from what I hear right now, anything being built in the suburbs is being picked up overnight. There are bidding wars. Lee, you're out there.
We had at the beginning of the pandemic, we had 11 single family home development sites that we hadn't sold for a decade, and 9 of them are sold. So I mean, it's been on fire, and part of it may have been the initial concern of the pandemic, but you're still seeing sustainability where even folks are still going back to Manhattan, and you still see a market that's rising. You're still seeing offers and proposals, 8 to 10 offers on single family homes. I live in Port Washington, so a lot of Port Washington that's happened to, but it's been a phenomenon all over the island.
Lester?
So we're out in Woodbury with a 55 and over, and the sales were going well. But since COVID, the people that were looking to downsize have found a tremendous number of buyers for their homes. So with that, we've seen some real pickup in sales because of the people leaving Manhattan in the city with young families looking to buy their home in the suburbs, and therefore giving people the ability to downsize and come into our 55 and over community.
Jessica, Jeffrey, and Ben, since you're the New York City developers.
I think that on a risk-adjusted basis, building condominiums, in the city of Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens, which are our 3 primary focuses as far as the market rate business is concerned, is very challenging. New construction real estate taxes are through the roof. Land prices are not adjusted downward as much as we thought. Interest rates are starting to go up. I think that the buyer base is shifting, at least in the short term. And between ordinary income tax and potential exposure to litigation down the road, once you factor in the spreads on construction loans and the cost of equity, it's really challenging to justify it being worth the headache.
One thing I'll say about that kind of market is we all know that the cycles have been coming fast and furious since the year 2000, whether it's economic, whether it's terrorist, whether it's a virus. So it's hard to gauge for large scale projects where the market is going to be in 2 or 3 years when you get there, which is why we kind of focus on our rental properties rather than for sale properties.
So I think in summation, I'm pretty certain about the success of the future of the next generation and the growth of all of your businesses. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. Bert, Lee, Lester, and Evan, Jeff, Jessica, Ben, And Robert and Andrew, thanks again.
Everyone
Thank you
stay
all.
safe and
Thank you.
healthy.
Thank you all. Thank you, Michael.
Take care.